We are live on LinkedIn. Good morning. Mary McCarthy here with a very special edition of the Data Tea. I am so excited today to be speaking to Nadine Merheb, who is the Data Strategy and Analytics Manager at the Chicago Bulls. That's quite the mouthful of a title. Nadine is also the author of her own newsletter, a Substack called Not Another Report. I love that title. Nadine, thanks for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it was a late night for many basketball fans. We're not going to go into it too much because both of our teams lost. You are obviously a Chicago Bulls fan. I'm a Denver Nuggets fan.
Great.
It wasn't good for either team last night, but that's okay. Next year is another year. But you were at the game, right, with your team?
With some of my friends, yeah.
That's exciting. And what was the atmosphere in the stadium?
There were a handful of Bulls fans there, so it was exciting in that regard. But definitely a lot of Milwaukee showed up to the game. It was in Milwaukee, and all of them were obviously excited, and congrats to them and their team. But a little bit sad to see us, exit the season. But
Yeah, good for the Bucks, and next year's another year, as we said, for your team, the Bulls, my team, the Nuggets, and so exciting. You are someone who we're going to talk about your career and your work in data, and you're someone who, my understanding is, you didn't aspire from the time you were a young girl to work for an NBA team. I know a lot of people who work in, whether it's sports management or anything related to sports, it's really kind of that dream from a young age. But you had quite a diverse career before you became the data analytics and strategy manager at the Chicago Bulls. So tell us your story.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't thinking that I was going to end up here or like really trying to find my way here, but went to school at the University of Arizona, was in accounting and economics, dabbled in a few different internships in like finance, accounting, and whatnot. Really had my heart set on going to consulting, so I found my way into strategy consulting, which brought me to Chicago, and that was actually my first taste of analytics and insights. We would do it at the client. We were training people at the company in order to be better storytellers with data, understand data better. And I was there for about a year and a half. I left to start a wholesale bakery, which was a 180 from my analytics career.
Wow.
But then a few months later, did some freelance analytics and insights work for Hyatt hotels, mostly with like their guest surveys, looking at what certain things do to impact the customer experience. And then about a year later, found my way to Uber Freight, where I was still in the analytics areas and supporting the shipper operations side of things. And then a year and a half later, and about a year ago now, I found my way to the Bulls. And so it's been about a year. It was a random posting that I saw on LinkedIn, and it sounded like it would be a great opportunity. It was great responsibilities, and meeting the team, like the team was great. And so, yeah.
I love that. Such a diverse background in terms of, obviously the consulting, but working at Uber, running your own bakery, all sorts of things that I'm sure created this, this rich background to get you hired doing this awesome job now. How does data work within the Bulls? I think we all have this notion of analytics in the sports world that we get from Moneyball, right? So we kind of know about the sports analytics side, but then the fact is there's also the business analytics side. And my understanding is that's the team that you're on.
Yeah, definitely think Moneyball has everybody thinking that analytics in sports is all about team performance and player performance and things like that. And there are teams that do that. Most sports teams have both a business team and a sports team. And even though I'm in analytics, I don't think I quite realized that there is this business analytics side until I really dove into, the process last year. But the business analytics side is actually very cool, and it's part of the other side of the front office in sports, and we are interacting with the other teams here, like ticketing, sponsorship, marketing, community relations, there's data everywhere that's on the other side, not related to sports. And it's more about the fans and, well, it's really all about the fans at the end of the day. And so that's kind of the space that we play in.
I know personally, if I were working in sports analytics or the sports world, that's the side I'd want to be on, because that's to me, it's the big business side, right? Obviously, yes, it's important what the players do. That's why everybody's there. But the money that's made and kind of the real fun is that customer side. So day to day, what are you working on?
Yeah, day to day varies pretty wildly, I would say, as it does in most analytics careers. It's kind of dependent on what's happening in the moment. And what I mean by that is if there's a bunch of projects happening, depending on what phase of the project, maybe my days are a little bit meeting heavy when we're trying to collaborate with other teams and scope it out or help teams understand how to use data. But then there's also a big part of my day that ends up getting spent with understanding our data, wrangling it, transforming it, making it usable, putting together those insights and making it so that other teams can have access to that data pretty easily or when they need it. We want them to be able to make decisions based on data. And so that's kind of like the high level. That would be probably true of anybody that's in analytics is saying those things. But it kind of depends on what part of the season that we're in and what team is needing help at the time. A lot of our work, we like to think of ourselves as a little internal consulting group to support the other teams, the other like business units that are a part of our organization. And so kind of whatever they're tackling at the time and how we can plug in and help them. Some of it's related to data, some of it's related to process, really just trying to help bring some insight into what they're doing and see where we can make things more efficient, where we can make things easier, things like that.
Awesome. And can we talk about some of the, anyone in analytics knows that the metrics you're working with are really evolving over time, depending on what the business wants and needs and what the data actually can provide. What are some of the metrics that, you and your team think about and are concerned about?
Yeah. Again, I think it's going to depend on kind of who the end user of that metric is. Obviously, we care about speed to insights, like how can we answer your questions faster and easier. But other teams are caring about like, how are our sales doing and how are we efficient as a sales team or how are we engaging with, our fans in different areas, what's happening in the arena on a game night. So kind of dependent on who the user of the metric is and like what project we might be focused on or initiative we might be focused on at the time. For example, like during renewals, obviously we want to know what % of our season ticket holder base renewed. That's a big metric. When we are looking at post game day, it's things like, what are people spending on in the arena and how many people showed up or bought a ticket and showed up. Like really depends on the user.
Right. And ultimately, a lot of the same metrics that any company is going to be concerned with, all those basics that have to do with how is our business doing and how can we break that down and measure it. Absolutely. What about, we know that analytics people, we always like to talk about the tools. What are your go-to tools sort of day to day in your work?
Yeah. I would say that the biggest one is probably our warehouse and using SQL to get the data from that warehouse. We are using on a daily basis things like Tableau to surface that data to the other teams that we work with or our team. We are pretty extensively using like a CRM system. So all of those are kind of where I live and play in a day-to-day role. But then we have to consider things like other technologies that the business is using and how do those things integrate together to create one picture. So if we're sending emails from a marketing automation tool, how are we making sure that that information is passed into our CRM so that people in CRM looking at contacts know what people have been opening and interacting with. And so kind of the data team plays this central role of understanding how it all comes together. And you have to be a little bit able to speak all of those languages and pick up those tools. But the main ones for sure would be like SQL, Tableau, CRM.
Absolutely. That actually refers to one of your posts in your newsletter, not another report. I forget how you say it exactly, but basically, as a data person, you have to be able and willing to learn a lot of different languages, right? And that's, I think, something that many people find surprising when they start in a role, whether they're new to data or not. Even if you've been doing it for 10, 15 years, you go into a company and you have to learn the tools they're using, which chances are it's different than what you used before. And then chances are in that same job a year later and 2 years later, there'll be new tools coming in, right? So there's kind of that, I don't know, a flexible mindset that you have to have.
Yeah, you definitely have to want to learn and be open to that kind of change. And the way that I like to phrase it, which is what you were referring to, is being able to translate. Like what is important to the sales team is different than what's important to the marketing team. And the way that they talk about those things is going to be different. But because we play this more central role and we're the ones looking at the data, we have to be able to understand the data and be able to speak whatever language those other teams are speaking so that we can understand, all right, this is what they're seeing, this is what they're doing, and then this is what it looks like for us. And when we surface it back to them, it has to be in their language so that they understand it if they're the primary users of it.
Yeah, I love that you explain it that way, because it really gets at this notion that what data people do is much more than quantitative. I think so many people still have this mindset that it's only math and maybe some coding. And the reality, that's maybe half of it, right? And if you can do that part, but you can't get it to who needs it, or speak those languages back and forth, the marketing language, the sales language, the C-suite's language, the quantitative work you're doing isn't really going to get where it needs to be.
Right. If nobody can understand your quantitative work, then is it worth you doing it at all if they're not going to be using it? And so part of that comes with being able to explain it and talk about it and put it in their terms.
Otherwise, it should be just another report, to use your title.
Exactly.
Reports. I want to look at some of the comments. People chiming in to say hello. We have David Regalado. Hi, David. He runs a big data engineering community in Latin America. So thanks for watching, David. These might be some of your contacts. So tell me if you recognize the name. Timothy Byrne. He says, still one of my favorite events is going to Bulls games. They treat their fans well, keep them entertained, and definitely factor in the nostalgia factor to remind them of the good times. Oh, thank you, Timothy. I haven't been to a Bulls game ever. So I'm going to put that on my bucket list. It was already on the bucket list anyway. Someone else at the CEA Barcelona office. Do you know that? That's somebody for you.
I think it's when I studied abroad in Spain, working in the study abroad program that I was a part of.
Awesome. Okay. Well, they say, great to see you. See what you're doing now, Nadine, sending online best wishes. So you clearly have an international fan base. I love it. A comment. This is about data. Finally, Josh Richmond says, what you're saying is 100% true. Being able to navigate multiple departments and the way they talk about the business is a critical aspect of being able to support the company as a whole. Absolutely, Josh. Thanks for that comment. I assume you're a data person. I can't see your title. And Millie S. says, a flexible mindset is key on all sides. And that is so true, because the reality of every data role, every data team is it's evolving, whether it's the tools or the processes or the expectations is evolving with sort of give and take from all sides of the business. So being a flexibly minded person, as you say, Millie, is absolutely key. So tell me, Nadine, your newsletter, what inspired you to start that? And tell, I've read it. I've read all the editions you've put out, but most people probably haven't read it yet. Tell us a little bit what it's about and why you decided to write it.
Yeah. I started it maybe 2 months ago now, and there was a bunch of reasons, as it usually goes. One of the things was I had read something about creating like a brain trust and finding a community for analytics. And so I was kind of on the hunt for that. And in my search, I didn't find a ton of, at first, things that would tell you about what the day to day was like and what it looked like to work in analytics, what the non coding skills were like. I think it's really easy nowadays, not easy, obviously, you have to put the work in, but it's accessible nowadays to go and take coding classes or learn languages or get certificates. And what's really missing is that the way that it applies to business and things like being able to translate and understand operations or understand different parts of the business is really key. And so it started out me trying to vocalize some of that and share that information. And as I was writing in the process, I realized it was a really good way for me to process my thoughts and kind of document the things that I had been learning and really just finding kind of like that professional voice and like being able to summarize what you had been working on and the growth that you see that's not in a quantitative fashion, as you mentioned before. So
yeah, no, I think it's a terrific read for anybody in the industry, but even more so for people who are maybe in their early years, because that's when, again, like you said, the training to work in data analytics, data strategy does focus heavily on things like the coding, which is, yes, the essence of it, but it's really much less than half of it. And there's not a lot of guidance in terms of how to learn the rest of it. So we'll put the link to the newsletter in the comments so people can see it afterwards. And a quick comment here from a viewer, Kevin Tran, who says, off topic, although it's not really off topic, Kevin, he says, I love Nadine's Bulls shirt, and we all love it. That's awesome. So in your newsletter, you have some great visualizations, some Tableau visualizations. I get the sense that Tableau is, yes, it's a tool you use working at the Bulls, but it's a tool that you've kind of taken to and enjoy playing around with.
A little bit, yeah. It's well, I learned it when I was like self-taught when I was at Accenture when I was in consulting trying to figure out Tableau. And so me learning it was just kind of playing around and building visualizations. And it's been a way to dabble in it outside of work. I think the way that we use it in work and out of work is very different. If you go on like the Tableau gallery, you'll see a lot of really great visualizations, and you often don't see that kind of stuff in a business context because a lot of the reports and dashboards that you stand up are things that are meant to be repeatable and they're updating on their own, and you are really trying to call attention to specific metrics. And it's not so much about like having fun and seeing what movie ratings look like or whatever else.
Right. So tell us about one. I think the latest one you published maybe was the Nicolas Cage one. Do you remember what that was about?
Yeah, it was. I found a data source that was on Nicolas Cage's movie ratings for all the movies he's ever done. And so I was looking at what it was from a critic standpoint and what it was from an audience standpoint, just across his whole career, and seeing how did it change, what were the top movies from a fan perspective, which were the ones where the critics were on one side and the fans were on another. Just kind of trying to play around, having some fun with it was really all that was.
Right. And what I love about it is nothing to do whatsoever with sports. Nothing against sports. I'm all for it. And I love the fact that you work in it day to day, but your newsletter shows that you can have a lot of sides to your personality, and you can, dabble in studying data about Nicolas Cage or whatever you want, in addition to doing hardcore business analysis for the Chicago Bulls by day. So that's awesome. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, so I don't want to catch you off guard, but what surprised you the most about the role that you're in?
I think what surprised me the most was that, so I've changed jobs a couple of times now and have been, interacting with the data, and everywhere you go, you kind of think like, we're having to do all of this data transformation and like cleaning it up and figuring it out, and like it must be better at the next place, and it's just different at the next place, but it's always that you're cleaning up the data and making it usable before you can actually use it. and that's just a fact. Like data, there's
It's the
always
Wild
an
West, even in the most advanced places. That is so interesting, right? Yeah, and you think, oh, it's not that the first place you are, the second place doesn't know what they're doing. It's the fact that it's still a field that's so much in its infancy that, and just by nature of it evolving, that that it feels day to day kind of like the Wild West. That is so interesting.
Yeah, it's evolving all the time. It is like there's exceptions for everything. It's very I mean, you have to keep up with not only what's happening in data, but what's happening in all of the other places that are generating that data. It's quite an interesting place to be.
Yeah, no, it's that's been a big insight for me too. Is I kind of heard that before entering the data analytics world, and then it's been confirmed in every job I've been in. And no shade on any of the jobs, but the reality is that it's almost like working on a construction site rather than on a fully built building. A couple of comments here. Connor Weber says, what? Which I think might be in response to the fact that we're talking about your newsletter. So I think people are excited to be discovering your newsletter. Lachey Fontenot says she just subscribed. So I want to know the numbers on your subscription after the show.
I'll let you know.
Some new subscribers. And then Connor Weber chimes in again with a great question. What are the biggest differences in work culture, just the general feeling on the job, collaboration at Uber versus at the Bulls? That's a great question.
Yeah, I would say that it's pretty different in the sense that all sports organizations are, and especially the Bulls, are this really small team with this really big brand. And so we have a lot of data and a lot of things happening, but our teams are pretty lean. Whereas at Uber, it was like, many teams of analysts around the organization. And I think my team alone was like 15 people. And so here it's a wearing a lot more different hats, and being able to not only focus on one function, but be able to understand all of the different functions. So I mentioned before at Uber, I was on shipper operations, like supporting the shipper team in freight. And here I'm supporting all of the different teams. And so it's a lot of very different projects as opposed to being really able to dive into one area. And from a work culture and collaboration, I think the data analyst groups are pretty similar. You kind of get the same people who are not the same people, but the same type of people who are very collaborative and like pleasant to work with and care about the numbers and what's behind them and all of that. And more broadly, I think collaboration at the Bulls is, it's been really great. All of the teams in some way, shape, or form touch most of the initiatives here. Whereas before it might be like, oh, we're doing this program for this one role. So I did the customer surveys for the freight customers, and that was just one piece. But this might be, oh, we're doing something that touches on our season ticket holders and how are we sending emails to them and who's reaching out to them and what if they want to buy a different product. And so there's all of these different questions that have to get answered in order to do one thing.
That's fascinating. No, and that absolutely makes sense in terms of how a massive but still new organization like Uber would have been working versus obviously the Bulls very established, but in terms of these business teams, it's all new, right? But because of the smaller nature, you've got different responsibilities than you would have had at a place like Uber. A comment here from David Regalado. He says, spending too much time cleaning up data sounds like you need to hire more data engineers, just saying. I would counter with, or maybe you need to buy different tools. So either one. Or also the reality, as we all know, is data cleaning and data wrangling is just a big part of these jobs, no matter, no matter how good your tools are and how much staff you have. That's a big part of it. Moving away from the strict data talk, I want to know, what's it like to work for the Bulls in the sense that it's kind of like working for a big Hollywood celebrity. It's one of those names that anywhere you go in the world, people are like, oh my God, you work for the Chicago Bulls. Is that the reaction you get, or is that just me reacting that way?
No, I would say that that's pretty similar to the reaction I get. I think that was also my reaction when I got the job. It's kind of just the constant state of my reaction being
That's
in the
awesome.
office and
Yeah.
seeing, just being around it all. But there is a lot of like, oh, like, are you on the sports side? And then I say no, and they're like, oh, and they're not really sure what I do. So maybe somebody needs to make a Moneyball version of business analytics.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, we can write the script if you want. um, but do you enjoy that part of it? I imagine there's a certain both pride and pressure that goes with working with such a like a legendary organization.
Yeah, I would say so. I think being from, or just kind of like having that career in consulting and Uber and all of that, it kind of carries that same weight where you're like, well, I don't want to, like, I want to uphold the name of my employer. And there's a lot of weight that comes with that. And here it's that your employer is kind of all throughout the city. And like
Mhm.
all the people are talking about the Bulls and like, how do you balance keeping it separate from your job type of thing. But no, I think it's still very, like, it is a very cool experience. I think the thing that's my favorite part about it is the exposure that brings. So I mentioned like we're a very small team, but with this big brand, and it's
Yeah.
a really unique space to be in. You're solving a lot of very interesting questions that you might not be solving at either a really small company or a really big company. We're in this like weird middle ground.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this, worldwide, you could be on the moon and people would know this brand you work for. And yet it's small enough that you can really make an impact in your day-to-day work. That's fascinating. I love it. So final question, you know that for this show, for every episode, we make a donation in the guest's name to an organization called Women in Data, to their scholarship fund, to encourage, obviously, other women to go into fields like this. So we'll do that after the show, and they're very happy to have you on and have your donation. And on that note, I want to know your perspective on being a woman working in, data analytics is still very male dominated, maybe not quite as much as like the hardcore software engineering coding only, but still, like, I don't know, data is still, I'd say in my experience, 80% male. I should have the numbers on that. I don't. And now you're working in professional sports, which is also very, very male dominated. So what's your advice to women who want to work in one or both of those fields, data and or professional sports?
My advice to them would be to not be afraid of the fact that there aren't women in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And like to reach out and to try to find ways to interact with them. So in the same way that I was trying to find a community in analytics outside of my job, trying to connect with people in the field. And that's kind of what is generally said about sports, but like being able to make those connections is pretty huge. I would say that in general, the industry is changing a little bit. Like you're seeing the support group, the employee resource groups, I should say, not support groups, for women's like empowerment. And, there's women's conferences and things like that are hosted. And so it is being brought to the forefront a lot. And I think, teams are also taking notice of what does that look like? And like, are we going to the right places to attract the right talent type of thing? So in the same way that we're posting on LinkedIn, are there other places where we might be able to get in front of audiences that are, that where women are, like, for example, that Data Angels group, like being able to post opportunities there or connect with women there.
Yeah, and Data Angels is a Slack community that another one of my guests started, Jessica Cherney, my first guest. And that's where you and I met, was the place where women in the field can talk to each other. And that's a great community. Women in Data is great. And I'm all for, doing what you're doing and putting ourselves out there so that women who want to work in these fields can have some sort of guidance. And anyone who's watching who's in that position can feel free to reach out to myself or Nadine on LinkedIn, read her newsletter, and we can point you towards some of these other communities because there's tons of support out there, tons of guidance. But when you're not yet in it, it's hard to know that, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this has been fantastic, Nadine. I hope we didn't disappoint anyone who wanted to hear more about sports metrics and analytics. But there's lots of places you can get that. I loved getting the insight into the business and what it's like to work for the Chicago Bulls. So we will talk again soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks everyone for the questions.